Hello, brubs. We're back with Dagny. Dagny, Juel, Przybyszewska, The Woman and the Myth by Mary K. Norseng, a 1991 biography, which I believe was written earlier, but this may be a re-release. I thought it was written in the 70s. Could be wrong, though. 70s or 80s. We'll see. Doesn't matter. All right, chapter 7. This is a long one, so I'm not going to delay. Let's get on with it. The Juels. The star saw my childhood. This star saw my childhood. It shined pale over the hillside's broad forehead, lay down like pale hands over the phosphor white waters of the deep. O star, sink back into my soul. O star, melt inside me. I, Shalen's store dunkel sal. Dagny was a creative, intelligent woman, yet she compartmentalized her conflicting voices so completely that she could hardly have known who she was. As a writer, she revealed that she understood her pathological inner fragmentation. As a woman, she seemed helpless to do anything about it. How did she come to be so? What in the workings of her family might have contributed to the fact that she was at once so well and so ill-equipped for life? Dagny's poetic vision of herself as a soul rent asunder in an unknowing world clashed absolutely with the image her family projected of stability and concern. From the outside, everything about the Juels spoke of well-being. Dagny's mother, Minda Blair, and her father, Hans Lamech Juel, were from families with long traditions. I mean, what family isn't? They married and bought Rallied and bought? They bought it? They married and bought Rallied, where they raised 4 talented, independent, and beautiful daughters. And there they are. Hello, brubs. Hans was a prominent physician and a highly respected public servant. Minda thrived in her role as mother. Their daughters, Gudrun, Dagny, Astrid, and Ragnhild, were devoted to them and to each other. Like Dagny, the Juels were very private people. They left little record of themselves, only a small number of letters, and memories passed down by their grandchildren. Too few historical fragments exist to reconstruct their family dynamic in any psychological depth. But on the basis of the fragments that do exist, in particular Dagny's limited number of letters, Ragnhild Juel Backstrom's correspondence, and letters written by members of the Juel family to Randy and Otto Blair, it is possible to construct rough images of the 5 people Dagny lived with and loved the longest. Most of their letters derive from the time subsequent to Dagny's 21st year, which she spent with the Blairs. But assuming that personalities and familial interactions remained relatively constant, a profile of considerable clarity emerges of the Juel family. Life was not as harmonious as outward appearances would suggest. What's up, bruv? Yet, just as Dagny's tragic poetic persona was a real, if partial truth, so too was the Juel idol. And I'm going to sneeze. Bless me. The single most striking fact about this family was that no one, not even Dagny, really wanted to leave it. She did not set out on her own until she was 25 and a half years old. Sneeze is coming on again. She then spent 3 of the first 5 years of her marriage back home in Raleigh. Her sister Ragnhild often came home after her marriage. Astrid never married and never left. Gudrun came back the least, but she often gathered members of her family around her in Lund and returned to Raleigh, as did they all, when there was a celebration or a crisis. Finally, it was Gudrun who assumed responsibility for Dagny's children, Zenon and Iowa. It may have been that the strength of the Juel family was ironically its weakness, especially in Dagny's case. Hello, Brabs! While she was the woman who inspired the myth of Dutcha, the Lady Europa and Aspasia, she was also both childlike and childish, leaving herself dependent on the generosity and goodwill of others, whether for money, love, or the care of her children. For a woman who cut such a new and independent profile, she was at the same time very much a child. The origins of Dagny's conflicted personality are certainly, in great measure, to be found in this family to which she remained so attached. In her prose poem, In Questa Tomba Oscura, Dagny placed her protagonists at the entrance to a narrow corridor lined with portraits. She stood before a corridor full of such bright light that at first it blinded and confused her, and when she again opened her eyes, she saw that both walls of the corridor were mounted with high, dark portraits of people, men and women, and all turned their threatening, contemptuous, and sorrowful eyes toward her, and in all of these grave, sick faces she read a terrible welcome. She saw them nod their pale faces reservedly, and in these many inscrutable eyes she read, Come, come near, you are not here yet. We only bring a greeting from the end that beckons you. Inspired by her own structural metaphor, we might walk down a corridor of Juel family portraits. The faces would be more benevolent than those she conjured up in her poem about death. But for her parents and sisters were loving and concerned people, but they necessarily gave birth to some of the internalized angels and demons Dagny struggled with so uncertainly. Dagny herself must temporarily recede from clear view as the primary focus rests on the members of her family. Once again, she must be seen and understood through others. Frustrating as this may be, it remains one of the abiding truths of her life. To impose a neater, more traditional story of this on this narrative of her life would simply be wrong. Instead, the reader must fill the void and imagine Dagny at the center of her complex family. Hans Lemick Juel. And there he is. Stern looking brother. Hans Lemick, or is it Lemich? Lemick, I'm just going to go with Lemick. Juel was the person around whom the Juel family turned. Born in the city of Hamar on October 23rd, 1839, he belonged to one of the oldest aristocratic families of the district of Hedmark. He studied medicine in Christiania and in 1863 moved to Kongsvinger, where within a short time he began his own practice and married the young Minda Blair. They had their first daughter, Gudrun, in 1866, their second, Dagny, in 1867. Hans was literally a friend of both poor men and kings. His medical practice was large, reaching to Hamar and far into Sweden. He was on the road for much of the time in the care of the sick and the dying. He battled the scarlet fever epidemic in the 1870s and was instrumental in ridding Kongsvinger of cholera in the early 1890s. In 1888, he was appointed district physician, and he personally attended the king. He was a political leader in the community, a long-standing and active member of the Conservative Party and its local spokesman from 1889 to 18. What? How could it be 18? Oh, I see. 1889 to 1897. He was also his family's beloved patriarch, revered by his wife and daughters, and looked up to by his relatives. Though Minda had 4 sisters, all of whom married, and 4 brothers, one of whom became prime minister, Hans assumed major responsibility for certain of the Blair relatives, extending great emotional and economic support throughout the years. When he died in January 1899, at the age of 59, his family felt ravaged. Before they left Raleigh for good in the fall of 1901, they marked his grave with a tombstone that read, "Here lies the friend of the people, the man of love, Hans Lemmick Juel." Like Dagny, the man behind the exceptional social mask was both more and less than he seemed. Father and daughter were the same clay. Physically, they resembled each other. High foreheads, fine cheekbones, strong noses, lids hanging heavy over the eyes. Psychologically, they were equally akin, complex, and private people, in spite of their high social profiles. Is that Dagny? No, that's her sister. Sorry. Hans, like Dagny, was an aristocrat of the spirit who held hypocrisy in contempt. His letters reveal him to be a man of rare honesty. When he felt that his brother-in-law, Otto Blair, had made the wrong personal decision in accepting the position of Norwegian Prime Minister to the King of Sweden-Norway, he wrote to him, "I bitterly apologize that my wishes for your contentment and happiness are not as warm as I sincerely wanted them to be. Forgive me, dear brother-in-law, these words, but I cannot be a hypocrite, least of all with someone I care about." March 6th, 1891. In the fall of 1895, his honesty conspired with his paternal concern to bring him into a confrontation with the enfant terrible of the Norwegian art world. Munch had painted Ragnhild's portrait in Berlin in early 1894 and included it in his controversial exhibition in Christiania in 1895. Hans objected to the way Munch had rendered Ragnhild's face. He was not specific, but he was undoubtedly disturbed by the provocative look Munch had given her. I mean, she kind of almost looks like she's wasted. Her and the hints of witchery which he had painted into her eyes, her mouth and the shoulders of her dress, his hurt unconcealed, Hans politely asked Munch to take the portrait down. Let's look at it again. I mean, in this day and age, anything goes, so who knows? Maybe it was justified for the time. Forgive me that I, a perfect stranger to you, express my opinion about your works. Please forgive me, too, that I ask you in the name of the friendship I know exists between you and a pair of my daughters and their husbands. Forgive me that I ask you to do us the great favor of removing our daughter Ragnhild's portrait from the exhibition. I know that both you yourself and several others with you interpret this picture differently than I do. For me, it was directly painful to see my daughter's face rendered in that way. So much I ought to say when I ask such a favor of a man who in no way owes me anything. October 10th, 1895. Hans objected not only to his daughter's portrait, but to Munch's lack of judgment in exhibiting a series of the Madonna motif, which he had entitled A Woman Making Love. The city of Christiana was not prepared to understand such a thing, Hans suggested. And I agree. If he was offended by that, I mean, the Madonna is way more sensual. He understood it, but let's see if they show a picture of it. Not that anyone, I guess most people know what it is. I can't find it. He was not prepared to tolerate it in public. Several of the pictures belong in an exhibition for artists, and only if you found yourself in entirely different circumstances than those in Christiana, where they naturally call for the police, closing the exhibition, confiscation, etc. Or was perhaps something else meant entirely with these pictures of women surrounded by fetuses? Munch immediately took the portrait down. Good man. In his diary notes, he remembered meeting Ibsen at Grand Hotel shortly thereafter. He asked about a female portrait I had just taken down from the exhibition. I told him that her remarkable Herr Father had asked me to remove it, that I had done so, thought this had interested him. Hans's letter is a moving revelation of his integrity as a man and a father, but it also suggests his complex outlook on life, progressive yet countered by an innate conservatism. His conflicting inclinations must certainly have affected the way he raised his daughters and the way they came to look upon themselves. Dagny's father was an uncomfortable pillar of the community. Professionally, he met with both career frustrations and financial difficulties, in spite of his public reputation to the contrary. In the fall of 1892, at the same time Dagny and Ragnhild were making plans to study abroad, Hans expressed an urgent desire to leave Kongsvinger and begin anew. He left his reasons curiously vague. I would happily abandon the old nest because of so many things, but damned if I can reveal all my reasons to you, he wrote to Otto Blair on December 10th, 1892. He applied for the position of district physician, I can't say it, physician in Acre, the large working class district of Christiana. His competitors were men with more university credentials than he had, and he did not suffer them lightly. He prefaced another of his letters to his brother-in-law with, "It's not a question of finding the bacillus in the shit, but of getting rid of the shit. This can't happen with the microscope." October 3rd, 1892. Dagny obviously came honestly by her contempt for the academic. It is curious that Hans should have wanted the Acre position in the first place. It paid little, which he said did not concern him, and the work was hard, given the plethora of health problems in such a poor and large district. In truth, just like his daughter Dagny, he seemed to be looking for something to which he might commit himself in life. For whatever reason, he did not receive the appointment and continued to work with his district constituency. As the district doctor, he had land and prestige, but he was actually money poor. Stosh wrote of his father-in-law in the summer of 1897, when he and Dagny, pregnant for the second time, were living at Ralhide. Mind you, Stosh didn't even have a job, and he was broke as hell. This is a very strange country. No one knows here how to accumulate riches, yet everyone has a lifestyle, as would a landowner of 3 villages. In our country, paper money they don't have, but they have a wonderful life instead. I doubt if my father-in-law could put his hands on 1,000 kroner, but he has 3 servants in the house and a nanny for Zenon. May 30th, 1897. What he was really saying, that he was too cheap to support him. Stosh's assessment was accurate. Hans had to borrow money from both his sons-in-laws, Helg Bachstrom and Wilhelm Westrup. When is the last name Vestrup, or yeah, I guess Wagner. But are these guys German? I don't know. Wilhelm Westrup, when he took sick a year later. What do you got, bruv? A very proud man, he tried to put the best face on what, for him, must have been a very humiliating situation. Ragnhild wrote to Helge just weeks before her father died. When he and Astrid spoke a while ago about the fact that it was too bad for you and Wilhelm having to help him with money, Papa said, but then they have gotten two wonderful wives from me. They have gotten the best they have from me. Updated, undated, but must have been written sometime in December 1898. When Hans died in 1899, he left his wife nothing but Raleigh. So he owns, is Raleigh a city, or is that, would he own the whole town? Which she was forced to put up for sale the year Dagny was killed. I don't know. But I thought it was a city, but apparently that was just the name of the house or his fortress. But as far as Hans himself was concerned, the best he had was also his daughters. When he first wrote to Stash in 1894, inviting him to Raleigh, he wrote about the loneliness of the house with everyone gone. Come when you want, the days are so quiet and empty here that my wife becomes quite melancholy. For me, it is no problem. I travel so much and have so much work to console myself with, so time passes for me. As stoic as he may have been, Hans sounded such a sad note in his letter to Stash that one understands how deeply he too missed his daughters. If there is one thing to which all the fragments of his history bear witness, it is his grand love for his four girls. Though instinctively conservative, he raised them with a liberal hand. He made it possible for them to continue their education as long as they wanted and to choose careers in the art world. He sent them on trips to Europe, Dagny as early as the age of 15 when she went to Germany after her confirmation. The book is Dagny Juel, Przybyszewska. It's a biography of one of Edvard Munch's muses. He treated his daughters as intellectual equals. Gudrun would often tell how shocked she was when she went to live in Lund, where society dictated that the women retired to the parlor after dinner, while the men enjoyed cognac, conversation, and cigars. She and her sisters had never been excluded from male company, and their young men friends had regularly been made welcome at Raleigh. Ragnhild wrote to Helge Backstrom, to whom she was secretly engaged in the summer of 1893. We have, you see, constantly had young men visiting, so it will not be strange at all if you come. July 4th, 1893. Hans's love for his daughters remained fiercely protective, even as they moved away. When he wrote to Munch about removing Ragnhild's portrait, she was 24 and had been married 2 years. His third daughter, Astrid, became seriously ill in 1894 at the age of 25. She gradually recovered, but Hans seemed reluctant to leave her side. In a letter to Ragnhild, he wrote that he was spending all the time he could with Astrid. Astrid and I spend the days together as much as we can. We take walks and we write together. I will have to leave soon. Then our time is gone. October 27th, 1894. Family lore has it that Hans told Astrid she was too frail to marry. She never did, though she had any number of opportunities and the encouragement of her sisters. Dagny returned to Raleigh both times she was expecting a child. Ragnhild recounted the touching moment from August 1897 when Dagny was 8 months pregnant with Iwa. The two sisters had driven out into the country to meet their father, who was returning home from one of his trips, And down there, the three of us pitched camp and ate apple cake and drank orange juice with whiskey and water that tasted incredibly good. Papa was, as always, when he has us along when he's out, charmingly sweet. Postmarked August 15, 1897. His affection for his daughters made him a vulnerable man. At Christmas time, 1896, he wrote to thank Ragnhild for an elegant knife she had sent him. I'll never lose it. Every time I use it, it will remind me of my own sweetheart, Tulla. December 30th, 1896. Yet Hans's protectiveness caused conflicts, perhaps in particular with Dagny. 2 months after Zenon's birth in 1895, Otto and Randy Blair had invited Dagny and Stash to their ministerial home in Stockholm. Fearing for Dagny's health while knowing how anxious she would be to accept the Blairs, Hans wrote to them, "Thank you for your continual kindness, but you must promise me not to repeat this invitation when she absolutely cannot make this trip before this winter, and ought not to be tempted further." December 4th, 1895. Dagny had, however, no intention of heeding her father's advice. Already in November, she had written to her aunt, "We're going to Paris around the 1st of December and not coming back again for many years." November 8th, 1895. Leaving Zenon with her parents, she and Stash did indeed go to Stockholm on December 15 to stay with Ragnhild and Helge Backstrom. Dagny did not spend her time there convalescing. Ewa Kosik revealed that Dagny and Stash visited Ellen Kay's literary salon, saw Eleonora Duse, and met up with their friend Max Dodenthay from Berlin. Dodenthay told of mesmerizing parties that lasted until dawn. "In the mornings my heart felt heavy and tired, but in the evenings I longed once again to throw myself into the witches' Sabbath." Dagny, Stash, and Dodenthay went on to Copenhagen sometime in January. Dodenthay continued on to Paris, but Dagny and Stash were forced to remain in Copenhagen for lack of money. It was at this time that Dagny submitted the stronger to the Christiana Theater, in all likelihood to see if she could finance their trip to Paris. The play was rejected, and late in February, Dagny returned alone to her parents and her son. Stash went back to Berlin. Dagny and her father undoubtedly disagreed on many issues over the years. She definitely had a different opinion of the Munch exhibit of 1895, in which Ragnhild's portrait had briefly hung. In a letter to Randy Blair, she wrote, "Yes, the uproar over Munch's exhibition was fantastically amusing. That's what's entertaining here in Norway, that every single person has the only important thing to say about art. They should really consider that Europe is always so endlessly far ahead. For that matter, they're probably better off as they are." November 1895. Yet Dagny, Europa, kept returning home. The hell does that mean? Yet Dagny, Europa, or said her, what she's calling her. One of the last times she and her sisters came together at Raleigh was the summer of 1898, when their father was sick with a cancerous growth on his eye. They were all there, their husbands coming and going, they themselves traveling back and forth between Raleigh and Christiana, where Hans was first operated on and then lay recovering for several weeks. Ragnhild's letters tell of the shifting moods of the sisters as their father grew worse, was operated on, and then appeared to recover. There was something movingly symbolic about the gathering of the daughters around the fallen and so beloved father. It is striking that Dagny married someone who was her father's opposite in almost every way. If Hans was the personification of the ultimate father, Stosh was the personification of the son, forever rebellious, irresponsible, irreverent, and irresistible. In contrast to Hans, Stosh had held both truth and tradition in contempt. Hans was conservative, Stosh anarchistic. Hans protected Dagny, Stosh exposed her to danger. Had Dagny been too protected actually to know that she was in danger? Or did she court danger, seeking to deny, through Stosh and the many men she gathered around her, what she most desired? Or did she find in Stosh a man who, though very different, was as enigmatic as her father? Dagny seemed to lose her grip on life at approximately the same time as her father died. This may have been coincidental, given the extraordinarily debilitating circumstances in which she was living in Poland. Yet there is little doubt that the loss of her father left her vulnerable. Minda Blair Juel. If Hans Lemmick Juel was the supreme patriarch, Minda Blair Juel was the supreme matriarch. She gave birth to 5 children in 5 years, her first when she was 21, her last when she was 26. She herself lived to be 83, surviving her husband and 3 of her children. Her only son, born just after Dagny, died at the age of 1 year. Dagny at the age of 33, and Ragnhild of cancer at the age of 37. Minda was revered by her children, her grandchildren, and her great-grandchildren. They all called her Babsk. What the heck is Babsk? Babsh? Please don't bring that name up again. Polish for grandma. The name that Dagny's son Zenon had given her. She was born on December 27th, 1845, the daughter of Marin and Albert Blair. Originally from Christiana, her parents had settled in Kongsvinger, where her father became the county physician. They raised a family of 4 daughters and 4 sons, most of whom maintained close ties and provided a large familial network for Dagny and her sisters. Minda loved to recount for her grandchildren the story of the night she first saw Hans Lemmick Juel. She was just a girl of 15. Hans came to their home to interview with her father. It was evening, and the 2 men stood talking in the parlor, in the glow of the fire warming the room. Minda stood watching them, unseen in the shadows outside the parlor door. She would tell her granddaughters that she knew already then that she was to marry Hans Lemmick Juel. Minda Juel, her sisters, and their children. Dagny is sitting to the left, holding an umbrella. The story would be unimportant, save for the fact that Minda treasured it so. Her fondness for it makes it a little mirror into Minda Blair Juel. And in it we catch a glimpse of a girl who loved romance and the fantasy of the soulmate. Dagny would carry the fantasy to a fatal extreme. Minda believed her destiny had been fulfilled when she married Hans. She spoke of the happiness she had known with him as the gift of her life, and she hung on to every shadow of life in him, as Ragnhild said, until he died. Yet if Minda was a romantic she was and remained, above all, a devoted mother. When her husband first wrote to Stosh in 1894, inviting him to Raleigh, he had said that she was suffering from melancholy with all the children gone. She seems to have welcomed the responsibility of her 2 small grandchildren when Dagny went traveling the world. In truth, she made it easy for Dagny to leave them with her. Sometimes after the death of Hans, Minda took Otto Blair's son, suffering from a nervous disorder, to live with her for a time. In her last letter to Dagny, she expressed her loneliness in a house abandoned by its children. It is such a painful feeling not knowing where a letter can reach you. Here, it is full summer with narcissus and lilac and fruit trees in bloom, but without children, it is empty and sad. Life in nature contrasts so sorrowfully with this desolately lonely home, so the future looms twice as large. She reasoned that by selling Raleigh she would regard the freedom to live as she should, that is to say, for the sake of her children. So I'm having Mr. Engelbretson put Raleigh up for sale, if that will work, so I can be nearer my children and at their disposition, if they need me. I still have, God be praised, my children and my grandchildren to live for, and they are precious treasures over whom I sincerely ask God to hold his protecting hand. June 2nd, 1901. She admonished Dagny, so far away near the Black Sea. Live well, then, dearest Dagny, and you too guard with tenderness the treasures that have been entrusted to you, your husband, and your children. Within an absolutely traditional framework, Minda Juel was able to reconcile the romantic idea of love and the bourgeois idea of family. Middle and upper class 19th century women grew up with the notion that marriage would ensure their fulfillment as spiritual partners, mothers, and legitimate citizens in the eyes of God and the world. Historically, the reality of marriage often proved disappointing for women, but the myth was maintained. In the case of Minda Juel, it may have been realized, almost to the point of cliche. Dagny, on the edge of a new era, both rebelled against the idea of womanhood for which her mother unconsciously stood and fell victim to it. She wanted more than a husband, children, and a home, but she wanted them too, and she was simply incapable, as any woman would have been, of being all things to all people, including herself. Minda Juel, only 22 years older than Dagny, was shaped by such different experiences that it is unlikely that she could have ever begun to understand her daughter's dilemma. In her last letter, she was still trying to enlist Dagny's solidarity in the only conspiracy she knew, the family. Minda's letter is at once a maternal plea and rebuke. She was concerned that Dagny had not yet settled down. It seems to me that with your errand, Jesus Christ, it seems to me that with your eternal traveling, you use up a fortune that would go far to live on in a well-ordered home. She feared that Dagny had left Iwa behind. You don't mention her. You don't mention Iwa. Perhaps you haven't managed to get her yet. If only I had her here in my loneliness. She is a dear little part of you. Dagny, mine, which I would watch over with great tenderness. She suspected that things were not right with Stosh, and dared not really imagine why Dagny had left for Tiflis with Emmerich. Is that man you mention rich? And are you to be his guests, or what? Underlying Minda's long letter is the premonition that her daughter is in danger, and for all the terrible feeling and all the tender feelings in the world, she cannot save her. I'm always so worried about you, dear one. Write immediately and send me your address. Minda's maternalism must have engendered very conflicting feelings in Dagny, who lived a life that flew in the face of everything her mother held dear, yet who returned to her again and again. There were certainly tensions between the two women. In August of 1895, for example, when Dagny and Stosh were at Raleigh while she was pregnant with Zenon, Ragnhild wrote to Helge in Stockholm, Maya Vogt is here right now, and it's not very much fun. They sit and play cards almost the whole day, and Dagny assures Maya far and wide how she hates Mama, etc. And now tonight she was very insulted because Mama didn't give Stash a toddy. Postmarked August 5th, 1895. Yet even as Dagny lashed out at her mother, she sought and depended on her care. If she opposed her, she also tried to appease her. In her last surviving letter to her mother, written in the winter of 1901, after she and Zenon had been reunited with Stash, she went to extremes to paint a positive picture. Stash was overjoyed to have them back. He was more successful than ever. Things were going well for them economically. They were on their way to a new life in Warsaw. She sounded more like a girl than a woman of 33 with painful years of experience behind her. Mama, she wrote, now you can really be pleased with us. February 1901. Minda and Hans Lemick Juel, independently and together as parents, were of both liberal and conservative bents. They raised their daughters with a progressive outlook and apparently a joyous spirit. All four sisters seemed confident of their own desirability. Their contagious charm and sense of fun were often remarked upon. Jens Thies, art historian and good friend of Edvard Munch, remembered his initial encounter with the Juel sisters at Raleigh. It was the summer of 1894 when Dagny and Stash first came up from Berlin. Those few June days I spent at Dagny Juel's invitation in her home in Kongsvinger were an unforgettable experience for me. The district doctor was traveling, and the young people ruled over the house. The independent and captivating Dagny, the piquant, or is it piquant? The piquant Ragnhild, who married the Swedish Dr. Backstrom, and the very young and beautiful Astrid. I mention it here because, in the first place, the Juel daughters were exceptional, sweet, and fun girls. The Juels encouraged their daughters to be artists, and they welcomed their bohemian friends into their home. Yet they were parental in the extreme. No more poignant example could be found than Minda's handling of her daughter's death. She preferred to let Dagny's memory die rather than suffer the impression of scandal. She commanded the silence that was to fall on Dagny, and in so doing, she checked her daughter's history in a way that cannot be undone. Yet, with her maternal blessing, she had also sent her out into the new, exciting, even dangerous world of art and music and culture in 1893. The children. She was leaving as always peaceful but sad. Gave me the pictures of her family house and her sisters. Gave me two two old Swedish candlesticks made of copper. They are from my home. Please keep them for me. Astrid, Minda, Dagny, Stash, Gudrun, Ragnhild, and Helge, Raleigh, summer 1895. Good times. I can see her right now, sitting in this armchair in front of me, her silhouette so prettily sketched, slender, in a simple black dress. I am looking at those candlesticks, which she loved so much because they were a reminder of her home. Lucina Katurbinska regarding Dagny's departure from Krakow. The candlesticks did indeed play on Dagny's mind. She had few personal possessions in Poland save for them. She incorporated them into the expressionistic womb sets of two of her plays. And in one of her last placating letters to Stash, She made a sad, fleeting reference to them. Perhaps they were reminders of the home she psychologically really never left. Oh no, that phrase is coming up again. Though she became one of the most celebrated women of the fin de sequel, she also remained so much the child. In this, both Stash and ironically her parents were her strong allies. Though it may be difficult to imagine the Bohemian Przybyszewskas in the context of the Juel's bourgeois gentility, there is every reason to suspect that they mutually satisfied each other's needs. Minda and Hans Lemmick Juel were the ultimate parents. Dagny and Stash were the ultimate children. The Juels, I don't know about that, they left their children with other people for half a year at a time. The Juels facilitated their coming home and seemed unwittingly to encourage their economic and psychological dependency. Dagny and Stash took every advantage. The picture that emerges of the Przybyszewskas stays at Raleigh is one of fitful children, their moods fluctuating between joy and boredom over being home. The Juels were remarkably accommodating, giving Dagny and Stash the run of the house and room and freedom to work. Stash was elated to be at Raleigh for the first time. He wrote to his mother during his visit in the summer of 1894 that his novel was going well and was soon finished. People here are extremely serious, taciturn. At first it was hard to get used to it, but now I feel completely at home. I'd preferably like to stay here the I'd preferably like to stay here the rest of my life. I will probably stay here until Christmas. Everyone is prepared to like me. Their friendliness is open and strong, since people here have great difficulty taking to anyone. All right, train. June 5th, 1894. I would probably stay here until Christmas. I'd preferably like to stay here the rest of my life. That's an all-time great line. Ragnhild wrote to Helge from Raleigh a week later. She reported, too, that it was good to have the Przybyszewskas home, and that both Dagny and Stash were working well. Though the inevitable frustration for Stash, too, little alcohol, was already taking its toll. Stash, who is great, is already almost finished with the 300-page long novel and has a multitude of things going. He is magnificently elegant in a new suit, fine new spring coat, and yellow boots. Naturally, an advance on the novel. They're drinking a little about the hike, but of course they can't afford it. Have already borrowed 10 of my 20 to send to Stash's brother. He is, as a matter of fact, delightful at the moment, and he was touchingly happy that I came. To be sure, Stachu suffers greatly from a desire for alcohol, which he, of course, has difficulty satisfying. June 13, 1894. The mood was tenuous. In a letter written 2 days later, Ragnhild reported that Dagny and Stash had been less than good friends since she had come. Stachu, she said, though he had finished the novel and was about to start on a play, was not very happy there. June 15, 1894. In July, Stash wrote to Richard Demmel that they were bored to tears. The days were passed monotonously, one after another, while all they did was wait for the mailman, eat, sleep, and play cards. By September, the labile Stash wrote again to Demmel, "An exceedingly sad country. I haven't once seen dancing here, only in Christmas in the cabaret. But there it was, Germans dancing. You can imagine people who learned to dance from typical beer-drenched Germans." Circa September 10th, 1894. During another long visit in the summer of 1895, when Dagny was pregnant with Zenon, Ragnhild wrote, "Stachu and I speak a little German with each other during the day, For that matter, I read or work and am with our boy, and the others play cards incessantly. Yesterday, however, we sat up in the big room and drank toddies and smoked until 1 o'clock and had a very good time. Maya Vogt is awfully sweet. Gudrun and Astrid are coming tomorrow, and then things will get lively, I suspect. Postmarked August 7th, 1895. Stash was soon frustrated, however, he wrote to Demel. Here in Norway there are naturally no people to be found, at any rate none whom you've not had completely enough of after being with them twice. August 15th, 1895. Dagny, too, was out of sorts, telling Maya Vogt how much she hated her mother. 2 years later, in the summer of 1897, when Dagny was pregnant with Ewa, there were again swings in mood. After Stash had joined Dagny at Raleigh, he wrote to his parents to assure them that all was well. They had expressed fears that he was unhappy, and he was anxious to convince them to the contrary. He wrote that there was not another couple as happy or at peace as he and Dagny. He praised his parents-in-law for being as loving and proud as his own parents. Dr. Juel often talked to him of his artistic plans and literally beamed, he said, when he read something complimentary to his son-in-law. My name is known here. Most of my books are translated and are much read. Stash took great pains to paint a picture of well-being at Raleigh, May 30th, 1897. But only weeks later, Dagny wrote on the backside of a letter Stash had written to their friend Hedwig Blix. Dearest Hedwig, nothing much came of the trip to Christiana. I hear from Fanny that you're living it up. God knows we're not. Stash had left Raleigh already in July to return to Berlin. The Bohemian is in a certain sense synonymous with the child. Immediate, self-indulgent, ignorant of any sense of future, Dagny and Stash worked and played at being all those things. As their friend Ida Auerbach Demel had written about them from their time in Berlin, both of them entertained a bottomless contempt for all kinds of order. They found the thoughts of tomorrow ridiculous and unnecessary. Stas consciously cultivated the myth of the child in terms of himself and Dagny and the relationship they shared. In July 1895, he wrote to Franz Servais from Raleigh that he and Dagny were like children, alone and at peace. Dagny was pregnant, he was happy. They went nowhere because they were completely self-sufficient. Oh God, how we play together. In both of us there is so amazingly much of the child. Now we've invented a new card game and spend hours playing together. In June 1896, after Marta Foder's suicide, Stash wrote to his parents, boasting of the good care Dagny was taking of him. She cooked for him, gave piano lessons, and was translating his works into Norwegian. But he lapsed into an infantile fantasy, telling his parents that he and Dagny had plans to move to Torren to be with them. They would live in the same building, and they would heed their advice, for they were both impractical and without experience. When Dagny was pregnant with Ewa, Stash again wrote to a friend that she was an absolute child. She dreamed big dreams, he said. She built castles in the air, but she never seemed to suffer if things did not turn out as she had planned. May 19th, 1897. Children themselves in so many ways, Dagny and Stash seemed helpless to care for their own children. They left them with others for long periods of time, and they exposed them to decadent environments. Ewa Kosik wrote about their first month in Krakow. The atmosphere of alcohol and drunkenness in the Przybyszewska's home shocked some people who became attached to Dagny. She is queen-like, a little reserved, but a very natural and lovable girl. but you don't want to visit them too often because their home resembles a tavern most of all. The children were only too aware of the drinking. In one of Dagny's last letters to Stash, written from Warsaw in the spring of 1901, she wrote, Zenon said when he heard you were sick, oh, poor papa, it must be that awful sickness you get from wine. For his part, Stash often seemed jealous of his son and his daughter. His letters from the time of both pregnancies reveal a growing obsession with his fantasy that he and Dagny were the world's children. In a letter to Dagny after Iwa's difficult birth, he asked only what his daughter was to be called. His primary concern was that he and Dagny should once again be playmates. Now we have to earn a lot so that we can devote ourselves to the happiness of our love, without a care like children, and proud as a royal couple. Stash at first tried to borrow money to come to Raleigh, but within days he was exhorting Dagny to come to him without their children. My God, how you must have suffered all this time, my golden queen. It is much better this way that you'll come to me. It will be infinitely good for you here. People love you and adore you without reservation. But then, good God, we don't need any people. More than anything else in the world, I'd like to be just with you alone. November 4th, 1897. And to Hans, who had urged him to come and offered to pay his fare, he wrote on December 1st, 1897, Dear Papa, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for the invitation, and I ask forgiveness because my telegrams caused such anxiety. I was very upset, but all is well now. I thought about coming, but decided not to. If I could have left the 1st of October, that would have made some sense, but now it is too late, and in 10 days Dagny can come here. And then everything will be all right. I am very nervous, of course, but that is because I have not seen Ducey for 6 months, and that's terrible for me because I can't live without her, and consequently I suffer so much. But when she is with me, then all is fine. Also, my play will be performed on the 15th of December in Lipsk, and I must definitely be there. I am longing to see Iwi, but what can I do? I'll probably see her in May. I gratefully kiss the hands of Mama and Papa and remain your grateful son. Ever concerned with himself, Stash referred to his new daughter as if in passing. Stash's negligence as a father eventually bordered on the criminal. He had, for example, little to do with his daughter by Anelia Pajakowna, Stanislawa Przybyszewska until she was a teenager. When he did pay her some attention, he also introduced her to heroin. What? She became an addict for life. Are you fucking kidding me? He finally meets his daughter and made her. That's not how you spell heroin either. That's fucked up. Dagny was never so cruel, but she was improvident and at times puzzlingly irresponsible. The greater responsibility for the children fell to her, particularly during their years in Poland, where she was forced to move with them from place to place. From the summer of 1899 to 1900, she spent much of the time in Zakopane. Or is it Zakopane? Zakopane, where they lived in rooms in various pensions, changing residences as the money slipped through her fingers. When she left Stash in January, she took Zenon with her, but entrusted Iwa to Stash's care. Within weeks, she had sent her son to her family in Scandinavia and did not see him for several months. In March, Stash wrote to Anelia Pajakowna, who was then caring for Iwa, that Dagny had written him from Prague. She wanted to come back to Krakow, and she desperately wanted to see Iwa. She was threatening suicide if Stash did not arrange it. Stash had Iwa brought to Krakow, but When he and Dagny did not reconcile, Dagny left again to be with Vincent Brzezinski, and she may have never seen Iwa again. When she returned to Poland in 1901, she wrote to her mother just before she, Stash, and Zenon were about to leave Krakow for Warsaw. Ivy is still with Mrs. Professor Juska in Lemberg, and I'm really happy about that. We have no maid here, and naturally, little room in a hotel. Dagny never brought Iwa to live with her in Warsaw. The Juel family lived according to a paradoxical set of norms. Minda and Hans encouraged independence and personal freedom in their children, yet they were larger than life as parents, and they created an environment both psychologically nurturing and inhibiting from which their children would not, perhaps could not, free themselves. Dagny, who was intense and internally torn, swung ever more fatally between the emotional poles of woman and child, just as she traveled back and forth between Raleigh and foreign places, increasingly far away. Oh my God. All right, that's the end of chapter 7. That was 1 hour and 1 minute.